I recently went and watched the new Devil Wears Prada, and oh my gosh, all of my millennial fantasies were fulfilled. And it also just reconnected me with a part of myself that I haven't thought of in a very long time. You see, when the first Devil Wears Prada came out, which was in 2006, I was actually living in the city. I remember very vividly showing up to the theater with my friends, and we were just all in awe because not only did I live in the city, but I was in the fashion industry. So it all just felt so real. And they did such an amazing job of recreating truly what it feels like to be in an industry that is so fast moving, that can feel really harsh and judgmental, that is extremely creative and involves thinking outside of the box. And it was just so good. But don't worry, this is not a movie review episode. It is really to talk about how it's important to not forget about who we were 20 years ago. Because I bet if you take a second to reflect back and think, where were you in that 2005, 2006, 2007 year? What were you thinking about? What were you doing? Because it lays the groundwork for where you are right now. And there were so many things that you were thinking maybe would never become possible, or maybe the version of you that is now feels like a dream come true to that 20-year ago version of you. So this episode really taps into a part of my life that I am so proud of, and I felt disconnected because I quote unquote left the fashion industry. But fashion is, I would say, like an identity marker for me. I am a fashionista. I love fashion. It's very much part of my brand and something I believe in. And it is a way to represent yourself. So anyway, we're going to get into it. But thanks to the new release of The Devil Wears Prada, I feel very invigorated. And if you've seen the movie, I would love to know your thoughts. I first visited New York City when I was 10 years old. It was literally like 2 weeks after my 10th birthday. And it was my dad and my stepmom and my sister and my stepsisters. And they had gotten us a really beautiful experience at the Waldorf Astoria, which is so fancy. And we went to the Macy's Day Parade. We went to Cirque du Soleil. And I just remember at that trip looking at my dad and telling him, I'm going to live here. No, seriously, I'm going to live here. And he was like, okay, Caitlin. For as long as I can remember and the stories that are told about me, have been a dreamer. And I now recognize I was a mini manifester, baby. I was like, no, this is how do I get into a track that lands me here in New York? Okay. So fast forward then, a couple years later, I'm a senior in high school, and, everyone's talking about colleges and all of the things. And I just was not interested. School for me was something like to check the box because we had to do it. It wasn't something that I was very connected to, but I was social. I loved my friends. I was involved in a lot of things. And so, we made do with what we had. But ultimately, I recognized that the field I really wanted to go into was fashion. I was working at our local boutique, which I started working at from the age of 12. And from 12 to 18, I kind of slowly worked my way up to become the junior buyer. And the owner of the store took me to LA for the first time. And I was just like, what is this place? When I came to LA, I was kind of, getting a lay of the land, thinking, could I move here? And honestly, it just didn't leave me feeling with the way I felt about New York. Now, at the time, and I still think that this is the case, there was only one public fashion school, okay? In terms of finances and academic resources that my family had available, I had to really focus on what were the state-funded schools. And even though this was state-funded, it was still out of state because I grew up in San Antonio, Texas, okay? So I was like, okay, this is the only school. I can't apply to, the Parsons or the SCADs. That's just not going to work financially for my family. So I did the one thing that they required, which was to write an essay, and I got in. I will also never forget that day of my life when I opened the mailbox and saw that huge envelope, and I just knew. I mean, I literally get teary-eyed thinking about it because it was that or community college, and nothing against community college, but that was just what I was going to do. And I feel like looking back, I would have really been selling myself short because there was something in me that said, this is where I need to be. And luckily, I was able to get some financial aid. I had the support of my family, and I packed my bags and off I went to FIT, which stands for the Fashion Institute of Technology in New York City. Now, this is what's really crazy, okay, when I think about this, because in 2005, when I moved, I was 18 years old. What? I moved to New York City without knowing a single human being by myself at 18. Sometimes I'm like, what the fuck were my parents thinking allowing me to do that? But thank God, because it changed my entire life. I am like, as a mom now with a 10-year-old, thinking about just like letting her go to some city. I mean, at some point we have to let go, but I'm still in awe because I was such a baby. So I started my first year of college and I wanted some money, right? We live in a very expensive city. And my parents were like, we got you the cafeteria card. We'll pay for your subway card. But anything above that, like, you need to go get a job. And I landed an internship at this place called Jared M. It is no longer in business. It was owned by a guy named Jared. And what they specialized in was bespoke suits for men. Okay. Tailoring is a very precious industry, and it's an industry, unfortunately, that is getting lost. The skill of pattern making and tailoring really is non-existent anymore. A lot of it has been computer generated and replaced. And I feel very lucky that I got to be in a place that educated me on fabrics, on what it's like to put together something that perfectly fits someone's body, right? It's not just a size you pick up off the rack that may be a little long or a little tight. This is completely custom made to your specs. And the clientele there were NBA and NFL players primarily because they were big guys. They were big guys with lots of money and wanted to look good showing up to their games. And so that began my official fashion career. Even though I had worked at the boutique, this was like, all right, here we go. I'm on my own. I'm this adult. I'm living in the city. And I started there as an intern and slowly worked my way up to junior stylist. And then a couple years later, the company got bought out by our competitor in Los Angeles, which is how I ended up out here. And I became like the visionary for that division. So it's very cool to think back, 20 years ago. And I loved comparing it to the movie, right? Because in the first movie, Andy, who is the journalist, right, Anne Hathaway's character, she is kind of coming into this industry with just no knowledge and so green. And then 20 years later in this version, she's really like come into her own and really owned her confidence. But that's only come because of experience and kind of having her feet held to the fire and having mentors that saw the best in her. And I would say that that's very similar to the experience that I had. Simultaneously, while I was going to school, while I was in this internship and building my way up, I was also volunteering for things like New York Fashion Week. So I worked multiple times behind the scenes, getting the models dressed, making sure they were, all their clothes were prepped and ready for the runway. And I was also, I did a lot of work for some magazines. I did some stuff for the school, and I did some tutoring there on retail math and understanding numbers and inventory. And it just was a time where I didn't realize everything that was compounding and how I would actually use it 20 years later when I'm owning my own business. The other thing that felt really parallel was that my boss, Jared, really reminds me of Miranda Priestley. I don't think that he listens to my podcast, but Jared, if you do, you are very much a Miranda, okay? I say that with so much love. He felt like an impossible person to please. He had extremely high standards and attracted clients with very similar standards. There were crazy times where my clients would literally be calling me from the plane like, hey, we decided to take off to this whatever place, Paris or the Kentucky Derby, or we're going to Miami for the weekend to hit up whatever, Art Basel. And so I barely packed anything. I'm going to need you to please make sure at my hotel room that I have X, Y, and Z ready for me. What? You're on the plane. It so reminded me of like when Anne Hathaway's character has to get like the latest Harry Potter novel that isn't even out yet for Miranda's kids. I'm like, I know that life. And I know people think that that doesn't actually happen, but it did for me in just different scenarios. On top of that, you're also so young and so impressionable, and you're really trying to be respected, right? So I did a lot of late night parties. I ran all around the city. I was exposed to very expensive luxury brands and fabrics and experiences, being flown to Italy twice a year, right? And I know all this sounds very glamorous, but a lot of it was like I was doing the grunt work behind the scene, and it just sounds really fancy and fabulous, but I was working. And it's given me such just like a beautiful perspective, because I think a lot of the times now, 20 years later, as a business owner, people only see the glamorous part, right? They see the Stripe payments coming through. They see the trips. They see not being able to work on a Friday or taking 2 days off a week or whatever it might be, thinking, oh, like, good for her, it's so easy. When in fact, like, I've put in a lot of the grunt work to get here in my business. And I don't think that if I wasn't exposed to all that I was in this industry prior, that I would understand that there's like a normalcy to that. And I don't mean that you have to pay to play. Like, you don't need to be treated like, how Miranda Priestley treats her employees. You don't need to have that kind of treatment. But there is sort of like an initiation to some degree. I know that, a lot of the times we think that just because we start a business that we're going to have all this instant freedom, or that we're just going to make all this money. And that comes with experience. It comes with showing up for yourself. It comes with doing some of the work that isn't so sexy and glamorous, right? And, I don't know. I have been really thinking a lot about that time in my life. And just as the sequel of Devil Wears Prada 2 grew with the characters, I felt like I almost played my own movie in my mind where, okay, now Caitlin, 20 years later, if a movie was made about you, where would you be and what would you be doing? And then I thought about in 20 years from now, if there was a movie made about me, right? Where would I be and what would I be doing? So it was just really interesting to take this time and reflect. And, a couple of the other things that I really learned through being in the fashion industry, truly, it was my first time being exposed to commission sales. So I've talked about this before, and I just said, my clients were these very wealthy and affluent athletes, but also businessmen, where they were purchasing, suits for $4,000, $10,000, whatever it might be. And here I was like a broke college student. That's a lot of money. And still $4,000 and $10,000 for a suit is still a lot of money for me now, right? But what I learned is that it's not my responsibility to, decide if my client can afford it or not. And almost like I was doing them a disservice at the very early years of me selling, because I'm like, I feel bad that someone's spending $40,000 on clothes. Like that feels like irresponsible. That feels really bad. And then I recognized that it was something that made them feel good. Like they wanted to do that. It felt like they were able to step into this identity that since they were little kids have manifested for themselves. And I really got to be part of this process. In addition, what I didn't realize that I was doing until now, many years later, is that I was coaching these guys to wear the clothes, right? They had grown up with a lot of them next to nothing. They grew up in middle to lower class families, and basketball and getting to the NBA or getting to the NFL was their ticket to freedom. And they have worked their entire lives and really beat the odds. Think about how many people dream to be in a position that they are, and they were able to secure their ticket. But the thing is, just because they had their ticket into this next level didn't mean that they knew how to integrate themselves into it. Because all of a sudden, when you're in this next level, people play differently. People treat you differently. And there was a level of comfortability I had with my clients because I've always been in this identity-led sales where I created a lot of trust with them. I created relationships with them. I was invited into their homes. I got to know their families. And it became this really beautiful, precious relationship with so many of my clients that I feel so grateful for. And in turn, we had a lot of private conversations that later I realized were me coaching. I didn't understand it at the time, but truly, they were looking to me on how to show up for themselves, how to be this next level version, but not get lost and try to look like everyone else. And, I really have fond memories. I also recognize how much I've grown in the last 20 years as a person. And doing these kinds of exercises are so valuable because we don't give ourselves enough credit. Because when I started my business 6 years ago, it's hard. And I would say I have new challenges now, right? I don't remember who said it, but they say new levels, new devils. And it's perfect for our episode, Devil Wears Prada, right? New levels, new devils. And while I have new levels of things that I'm dealing with, I still remember how difficult I thought it was in those early years. And I was like, man, I'm not getting there fast enough and this isn't happening. And when you think about, okay, but you're going to get there. Like you are figuring it out and you are going to eventually arrive if you just keep showing up for your dreams. And ultimately, I would say that, in this episode, I know I shared a lot of my backstory, but what I hope you take from this is number one, to reflect how far you've come in the last 5, 10, 20 years. But also to remember that your dreams are worth showing up for. And even though I went to school for fashion and I'm not currently in the fashion industry, those experiences shaped me. And it is just a different version of what I set out for myself. So show up for your dreams. Remember and give yourself credit for how far you've come. And really, really remember that at the end of the day, that version of you that had the hunger, the curiosity, the innocence is still there, and you can let her out to play at any time that you want. I'm so grateful that you are here. Please keep showing up every week. Share these episodes with a friend that you think might need this message. You can use the button right here to subscribe, and then below you'll see all of my free resources for you. I'll see you back here next week.